Deshin Tattagato Yawa Datta Deshin Chayo Niroda Evam Vadi Mahashramanaye Svoha Om Chönam Tamche Gyule Chung Tegyu Deshin Shekpe Sung Gyula Gokpa Kaimba Gechun Chembo Deke Sung Gechun Chembo Chingilo Gechun Chembo Ngodrups Gechun Chembo Trashishon. Locho Sampo Pagyu Trashipa Tuche Tempe Trinle Yarngonda Pege Drolor Zampe Ze Parche Pande Lame Shabla Solwade Om Guru Vajradhara Suma Timoni Shasane Karp Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Suma Timoni Shasane Karp Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimu Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimu Nishasane Kar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimu Nishasan Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Dagil Jetsun Lama Tuje Che Nyamda Dala Tuje Siksu So Gebe Shesan Dala Tendo So Uyon Sunge Nawa Tsedo So Tseji Ningne Sowa Debe Tse Dechen Korlo Visu Lekshune Yila Sambe Dede Malepa Geme Lunge Drubra Chingi Lo Tsoni Sodan Diktun Shape Tse Dunge Namke Yinso Lekshune Lapchen Tsoni Yonso Tsopa Dan Chera Nyetun Chamra Chingi Lo Chancho Parge Ninsen Tukun Tu Nyu Peme Siudru Lek Chancho Drube Gegen Kunshishi Tungen Dela Drubra Chingi Lo Dagi Lo Na Chela Chokpa Dan Chemin Samjurang Emba Shiwa Dan Chedan Tumbe Dede Malupa Beme Lunge Drubra Chingi Lo Dorna Tingne Tsera Tamche Dan Techi Pardo Neka Tamche Tu Rese Kyamne Lama Kele Me Tukje Chingi Dala Siksu So Gongyab Drewe Nyamda Dachala Jetsun Lame Tuje Rab Gongne Kodan Sungi Nawa Drame Tu Tobra Shu Kewa Kundu Yanda Lama Dan Drame Cheki Pela Longche Chi Sadan Lamge Yunte Rabzone Dorje Change Kopa Nyur Tob Sho Pakyuke Kudan Dagi Lu Pakyuke Sundan Dagi Tugdan Dagi Tenyerme Chiktu Chingi Olo Makyuke Kudan Dagi Lu Tenyerme Chiktu Chingi Olo Om Muni Muni nipu ki choshi me to chamare raba linga shi ni de gempa di sange shinto mikte ulwarki drokun namda shingla chöpar shoyidam guru ratna mineral kam niryatayami Sangye chedan soge chonam lai chancho pardo dani kyapsu chi dagi chushe gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sangye drupar shoya sangye chedan soge chonam lai chancho pardo dani kyapsu Dagi chushe gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sangye drupar sho sangye chedan tsogi chonam la jancho pardo dani kyapsu chi Dagi chushe gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sangye drupar sho
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Tamche ketu dagi chöten to, tamche ketu dagi chöten to. Buongiorno.
Good morning. Today I would like to go right to the point, because it's happened many times in the past that I've started explaining this text or to transmit these teachings, that I dedicated a lot of time to the beginning, and then we have to hurry when we get to the end, because time is what it is. And instead, I really care a lot about the end of the text. So I prefer to go a little more quickly. I'll get to hold back a little bit to not give long translations, and then if we need, we can always come back. So let's start from the beginning. The name of the text, Lojong Tundume, which means the 7-point mind training. What does mind training mean? First of all, it means that our mind is malleable, that our being, it transforms according to what it does. That today, we are the result of everything that we've done, all the interactions that we've had, the thoughts that we've had, we're the result of all of that. And it's because we have free will that we can choose if we want to continue to transform ourselves, train ourselves, if we want to train ourselves, shape ourselves, if we want to do that with awareness or without awareness. In just a few words, every interaction that we have, we are transforming ourselves. We don't have the choice to change or not change, to train or not train. With everything we do, we are training. We are transforming ourselves in every moment, every day. The more I get angry, the more angry I will get. The more I complain, the more I will complain. I'm getting used to that. I'm familiarizing myself with that way of thinking, that way of acting, that way of being, of doing. The more I see reality in a certain way, the more I get used to seeing it that way. The more I act in a certain way, the more spontaneous that way of acting becomes. And so what happens with this, mind train, the word to train, it really shows that the more I do that thing, the more natural it becomes. And here we have a starting point, a choice. At the beginning, it's fundamental, and I'm going right to the point. Excuse me if it's too direct, but one of the very, very first steps of a sincere spiritual path is choosing to continue victimizing ourselves or not. Because as long as I keep victimizing myself, I put the responsibility on everyone else near near me, around me, and on my side, I wait for the world to change so that I can change. So a year goes by, 10 years go by, 20 years go by, 20 lives go by, and here we are. And there was a passage in a book that I read some time ago, a short time ago, that talked about this, and I'd like to read this passage because it explains it with a he'd like to read this passage because it's really beautiful. And now Lama will kindly send me the text by. It's beautiful to see how human beings, when we look at something with the same attitude, often what is seen is very similar. And in different spiritual traditions, when man looked at himself sincerely, it was clear that there's no reason to victimize ourselves. There's no space to victimize ourselves, because what happens around us, what the person next to me does or doesn't do, it's not my problem. Excuse me if I say it like that. Not in the sense that I don't care. No, it's not my problem in the sense that I can't resolve it. What I can resolve is my behavior, my way of interacting with others. but in front of your behavior, how I act depends on me. In front of your behavior, how you act, that depends on you, not on me. That's why I say it's not my problem. But one of our tendencies is to say, yes, it's true that I should change this behavior. Yes, it's true that my attitude of attachment, of anger, jealousy is not good for me, but... And I remember this phrase that I read just a short time ago, which was anything, and it was everything that comes before but is bullshit, in the sense it has no value. So yes, but just doesn't work. So here, this is said with with more refined words, and I recommend this book. It's a book. It's called. It's written by Martin Buber, and the title is Man's Walk, Man's Path. And it is necessary for man to first realize himself that the conflicting situations that oppose him to others are only consequences of conflicting situations present in his soul, and that therefore he must strive to overcome his own inner conflict in order to be able to turn to his fellow human beings as a transformed, pacified, and establish with them new transformed relationships. Then he says also, starting with oneself, that's the only thing that counts. At this precise moment, I shouldn't occupy myself with anything else in the world except for this beginning. Any other position I take distracts me from this start, undermines my resolve to put it into action, and ends up causing this bold and vast undertaking to fail completely. The Archimedes point from which I can lift the world myself is the transformation of myself. If instead I place 2 points of support, one here in my soul and the other there in the soul of my fellow human being in conflict with me, the only point on which a perspective had opened up for me immediately escapes me, or rather, just asking, instead, I place 2 points of support, one here in my soul and the other there in the soul of my fellow human being in conflict with me. That only point on which a perspective had opened up for me immediately escapes me. That's what happens when we use but. Yes, it would be better if I didn't act like this, but look what this other person does. As long as we stay with that attitude, we'll be there waiting for the world to be different, waiting for people to act differently, and we don't really take the reins in our own hands. We don't take responsibility onto ourselves. And with this, I don't want to say that we're not influenced by the behavior, the choices, and the actions of others. We are strongly influenced. What other people around us say, what other people do, what people think, the choices that they make, every interaction that we have with every person, with every being, influences us strongly. But it doesn't depend on us. What depends on us is our behavior accordingly, our way of behaving in the face of all of that, the way we speak, the way we act, the way we think. And if we're waiting for the world to be different, for something to change, we'll spend our whole life waiting. I don't know. If there's someone, for example, in your inner circles, your friends or co-workers or family even, if you're waiting for things to be different from a long time. Since a long time, my mother, my father, my auntie, my son, my uncle, my daughter, my grandpa. Oh, if that person were different, everything would be fine. Oh, and look at this one that keeps doing that same thing over and over again. And we see that we justify that we react in this way. We act in one way, or we get upset. We get upset for something else because of that situation that keeps repeating itself. Okay, we understand, but it's just, it doesn't work. So the point is, we need to allow ourselves, and it's not easy. And let me repeat that, it's not easy. We need a certain maturity to look at ourselves in the eyes and say, I'm too old to be victimizing myself. It's enough. It's not useful. It's no function. And this doesn't mean that I need to stay in every kind of situation because I'm not the victim. I can not blame the world, but also recognize my own weaknesses and see that there are certain situations that I don't have the ability to act differently. So I need to make space so that I can give myself to learn how to act differently. So I choose, and I certainly don't stay there and victimize myself waiting for someone else to change their behavior. I don't know if that's true. So Lojong, I said I didn't want to make a long introduction, but okay. So Lojong, so mind training, starts from this, that I take the reins of my own life in my own hands, and I choose consciously, with awareness, how I want to transform myself, what I want to familiarize myself with. I have clarity about who I want to become, and I act accordingly. In mind training, it's fundamental that strength that guides us is the future and not our past. I act in the present, not as a reaction to the past, but as a cause of the future that I want to see, that I want to live. And this requires inevitably a certain level of maturity. And we can all do it, I'm convinced. But we need to be quite resolute. We need determination. We need clarity within. We look at ourselves in the eyes, and say we take the bull by its horns, and we say enough. We don't need to go round and round, not wasting time. No, it's enough. We stop victimizing ourselves. If you remember yesterday, the point that Geshe Chekawa and Geshe Chekawa said, that Geshe Chekawa said to Geshe Chekawa, you haven't heard these teachings because most people don't have the maturity to hear them. They don't have the determination to put these teachings into practice. And the basis for having this determination is stopping to victimize ourselves. Is stopping to victimize ourselves. So we look at ourselves sincerely, with affection, with love, with kindness towards ourselves, without any kind of sense of guilt. But we see what we want to better, what we want, what we have, what we can rejoice about, and we give ourselves a direction without adding any kind of but. we allow ourselves really to say, what you do, I hope that you could understand things differently, do things differently, but it doesn't depend on me. I invite you also to read. I invite you to read even just the first couple pages. This is an antique Greek text from the Stoic of so it's from Epiteto, and just read the first couple pages. Again, here's a different context, but it talks about the same things and starts from the basis of what depends on me and what doesn't depend on me. That our suffering comes from trying to have control over what doesn't depend on us. And what happens around us, as how people behave, what happens around us, that influences us, yes, but it doesn't depend on me. My behavior, my choices, my thoughts, my level of morality, that all depends on me. I need to be able to control that. I can control. And that process of Lojong is really about training ourselves on what depends on us, or we can become a better version of ourselves. And this process is divided into 7 points. After the 20 years that Geshe Chekawa spent with his master, remember when Geshe Chekawa went looking for Geshe Laringtampa and met Geshe Chekawa, he was able to summarize all those teachings and in these 7 points. So training in 7 precise points. Let's start with the first. The first point is that first line, and when we take the text here, what's written in our little book, what's written in italics, these are the notes, the annotations written by Pabonka Rinpoche. What's written in bold, those are the titles that were also added by Pabonka Rinpoche. And what's written in normal plain text is the original root text. So it says, number 1 is first, train in the preliminaries. So train in the preliminaries. The preliminaries are these inner states to be developed before being able to develop love towards others. In essence, they are, first of all, recognize the preciousness of this life. We've spoken recently about this extensively, and there are many other points that will come, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. But the first point is we have an opportunity here in this life that is very difficult to find, and it's very, very precious. We have these 3 conditions. We have the minimum necessary, materially speaking. We have a comfortable survival that allows us to have that inner space, because when one is really struggling to make ends meet, struggling to survive in extreme situations of danger, of war, or hunger, or thirst, or extreme sickness, it's very difficult for one to have any kind of inner space. So we have that first condition, which is it, it, extremely rare. We have a sure, safe and secure survival. Unfortunately, it's absurd, but that's we're the minority in this world. This allows us to have time and space, inner space, to think about things that are much more than just surviving. Of course, we can fill that space up with superficial things or meaningful things. But we have that choice. And often, if we look, the development of culture requires the a material development. These societies that had most culture, dance, art, these were societies that had richness. They had riches that allowed them to develop all of these aspects. Because if you don't have food to eat, then the society spends its energy looking for food. It reminds me of something about Marx, but this is a different point. So the condition on an individual level, on a fundamental level, is having our needs, our material needs met, which doesn't mean that he who doesn't have this can't follow a spiritual path. It just means that if someone is able, that means that that person is already an exception, is already a special person. And for the majority of people, that's not the case. The second condition that we have is having someone who guides us correctly along the spiritual path, which doesn't necessarily mean being Buddhist. I just made now two references to two paths that I think are very valid, but are not from Buddhist authors. So it's important to have someone it's fundamental to have someone who guides us correctly. And the third point is having the sincere desire to practice. These three conditions are rare and powerful. The first preliminary is familiarizing ourselves with the preciousness and the rarity of this human rebirth. To develop this feeling that this mind that says, I can't waste any time, which brings us to the second point, which is impermanence, the certainty of death and the uncertainty of the moment of death. So I have a condition that is unique, that allows me to die a better person than the one that was born, that allows me to really develop more patience, satisfaction, balance, joy, to have less hate, less anger, really to grow, can allow me to be a positive interdependence in this world and to live this world in a meaningful way, also assuring me a good continuation after this life. But the reality is, how much time do we have? A lot, a little? We don't know. It's uncertain. I'll tell you that it's uncertain and very, very little. Because even if we live to be 100, it goes by quickly. We're distracted. And at the end, the time that we're able really to dedicate to something deeper and more meaningful, if we're not careful, it becomes very, very small. And this is not because we lived in a city or here or there. Even if you went to live in a monastery in Tibet, it's easy to lose yourself in mundane things. So That first preliminary is the preciousness of this life, and the second is in permanence, that awareness of one's own death, which is not about being afraid of death. It's that feeling of urgency. There's nothing wrong with dying, but there certainly is in living life badly. So the problem isn't dying. The problem is living life badly. So I can't waste this life. I need to make it meaningful today, because I don't have time to waste tomorrow. That third preliminary is the law of karma. Every action that I do is an interaction. And wherever there's interaction, inevitably there is transformation. Today, I am the fruit of the result of all the choices and the interactions that have come before today. And what I do today, these are the causes for what I will be tomorrow. So we need consistency, coherence, a sense of self-responsibility, where I act according to what I want to become. And I need to avoid acting in a way that I don't want to become, don't want to be. And this is where the law of karma comes into play. Then, the next preliminary is seeing samsara. In a few words, there are three types of sufferings that are described. We have the suffering of suffering. It's everything that we normally call suffering. Because, let me just take a step backwards. We are not able to do what we don't want to do. So the first preliminary, this preciousness of this life. The second one is impermanence, the certainty of death and the uncertainty of the time of death. The fourth is the law of karma, where I generate awareness that what I experience is the result of my past interactions. So I'm not a victim of the world. And that fourth awareness, the fourth preliminary, is asking ourselves what we want. What do I want for me? And here we see that deep feeling within, that sense of attraction to happiness and aversion to suffering, which we all have. At the same time, we do what we want. We're not able to do what we don't want to do. We're able to do things that we don't like, but at the end of the day, it's better to do. And so we can say there are things that we want to do. So what do I want really deeply? And at the same time, the question, what do I want, goes together with the question, what do I not want? What we don't want is to suffer. But our idea of suffering is limited, like our view and understanding of happiness. Normally, we project our happiness and suffering solely on the sensation of pleasure and the sensation of pain or displeasure. We are strongly conditioned and attached to our sensations. This actual sensation of pain or displeasure or also of pleasure. I don't mean to say, sometimes that word sensation creates a little bit of confusion with, if we use, here we're talking about sensation and not feeling or emotions. Here we're talking about pleasure, pain, or the neutral sensation. And we're conditioned by our sensations. And often we project our happiness on pleasurable sensations, and we try to avoid displeasurable sensations. And Buddha described this as the suffering of suffering that should be avoided. But Buddha described two other types of sufferings that should be avoided. The second one is called the suffering of change. The suffering of change. All things that don't show, they don't manifest as suffering, but they are of the nature of suffering, because sooner or later they will manifest as such. Let's make an analogy. Maybe just a whole heap of something stinky. Can imagine, everyone can imagine what they want. Something really, really smelly. As we smell the stink, it's a suffering of suffering. And at a certain point, we cover it up with paper and we spray it with perfume. Once it's covered up, we don't smell the bad smell. We smell the perfume, and that's the suffering of change, because sooner or later the perfume is going to wear off and the stink that's underneath is going to come out again. Similarly, when we generate sensations of pleasure, but without resolving the causes of suffering, in other words, we face the symptom but not the sickness, the symptoms sooner or later will reappear. And all of these sensations of pleasure that are not negative, but are of the nature of suffering, because the real cause of suffering is not faced, because this sickness is not cured. One is looking only to face the momentary symptom. The example I always give is, if I'm thirsty, I drink water and I feel good. But if I keep drinking water, what would happen? Sooner or later, after the fourth or fifth glass of water, it starts generating suffering. And all pleasures of the body are like that. Think of anything. They're all like that. Think about something you like very much, your favorite food, or being together with your most adored person. And then just imagine that sensation that goes on and on and on, that caress that doesn't stop after 2 hours. That just imagine anything of this kind. And there's not one that can uphold a state of long-lasting happiness. Material things, recognition of our image, sensory pleasures, these are all part of the suffering of change, to which we have normally a great reaction of attachment, which is also a cause of suffering. I repeat that these things in and of themselves are not negative. They simply don't have the ability to uphold, to sustain happiness. So the error is not experiencing pleasure. The error is projecting that pleasure as our happiness. Nothing wrong with eating something delicious, but the error is then having to go on pilgrimage to find good restaurants, because between one restaurant and another, where is our mind? Oh, it's so delicious what I ate. How can I find that again? Oh, that restaurant wasn't good. I mean, how much space in our lives is taken up by pleasure? And in looking for pleasure and in criticizing what wasn't good enough and living around all of this so much. So the pleasure in itself is not the problem. It's the time we use up and the suffering involved and projecting our happiness onto something that cannot sustain it. That third type of suffering is the fact that it's called the all-permeating suffering. This the fact that it doesn't matter where I go, I need to bring myself along. Like sometimes people say, Lama, I want to take a vacation from myself. And there are some people who try. How can you try to take a vacation from yourself? Alcohol, smoking something, various drugs, all kinds of pleasures where one tries to run away from one's own feelings or one's own experiences, to run away from himself somehow. There are things that can momentarily help you do that, but when that effect of that substance wears off, or when that moment of enjoyment passes, that heap of stinking stuff is still there, so it doesn't resolve it. The fourth awareness is understanding that the solution isn't covering up what stinks. The solution is cleaning up what is rotten. But to do that, you need to face it. You need to put your hands in what's rotten. And it's not pleasurable. It's not easy. It's much easier to keep buying, liters of perfume, or to covering up, to not hear, to not smell, to not see, instead of actually putting our hands in it and cleaning. So it's this awareness that at the end of the day, it's not enough. We have to clean what's under. We have to face our selfishness, our fears, our traumas, that which is out of balance within ourselves. If we don't face the causes of suffering, that suffering will continue to manifest itself in many, many different ways. So samsara is this cycle of mental defilements, ignorance, selfishness, hate, anger, dissatisfaction, etc., to which we act verbally, mentally, and with our body. And so then we experience the results of all of that. And with those results, again, we react with the mental defilements, and we create this cycle, and we're within this cycle that we continue to nourish. So the fourth preliminary is the awareness that we want to get out of samsara. This is my priority, absolute priority. When we get there, translated as the term in Tibetan is nejung, the best translation would be the definite emergence. Often, and at the beginning it was translated as renunciation, but I think that's a wrong translation, because renunciation gives us this idea of sacrifice. And this has nothing to do with renunciation. Nebar jungwa. Nebar is certainty, and jungwa is to emerge, to come out of. So it's definite, the certainty of being able to get out of the cycle of suffering. It's an act of love towards ourselves, where I have clarity about what I want. I want a state of happiness, of peace, of well-being that is sustainable, independently of where I am, with whom I am, and in the situation I find myself. I don't want to be the victim of the world. I want to be well with myself and with others, regardless of where I am. I don't want to depend on conditions that go beyond me to be well. And so to do this, I need to overcome my own problems, my own inner troubles. And I want to get out of samsara. So this definite emergence, in other words, it's these preliminaries. When it says train in the preliminaries are concluded when one can really fall in love with inner peace. This is the main point, where we fall in love with inner peace. We say this life is too precious to waste it. It will go by quickly. And my absolute priority is inner peace, is to be well with myself and with others. And that's why I live a life that is consistent with my priorities, my ideals. And when we get to this falling in love with inner peace, this certainty of being able to get out of samsara, at that point one has concluded the first of the 7 points. Someone might say, let's close up the book. And so if I haven't concluded the first, why should I continue with the other points? For many reasons. First of all, it's important for us to have a direction, to see the steps that we will need to take. And number 2, we need to train ourselves in the various steps to gradually realize them. So the first part of the preliminaries, I've talked about it many times, we've repeated it many times. Even when we do the preliminary practices, which we did today before self-healing, what are these prayers? That's a wrong term to call them. What are these verses that we've recited? The taking of refuge is where we generate that certainty of wanting to get out of samsara. When we generate bodhichitta, we're generating love for others, and all the others are the basis to generate positive karma and eliminate the negative, without getting into too many details, but this is the basis. So here where it says first train in the preliminaries, some people think that training in the preliminaries might be the great preliminaries, 100,000 Vajrasattva mantras, 100,000 water bowl offerings or prostrations or mandala offerings. These are also called the preliminaries and completing the preliminaries. But we're not talking about those. Here, train in the preliminaries, we're talking about states of consciousness that need to be generated. These external practices are necessary to sustain these inner states of mind. But just in a few words, let's say this is about stopping to victimize ourselves. We recognize the preciousness of this life. We see that we don't have time to waste. Life goes by so quickly. When we go to sleep at night, we don't know what's going to come first, the next morning or the next life. It seems like a joke. It's like a way of, just saying, but it's true. When we sit down for lunch, we don't know if it's going to be our last meal or not. We really don't know. When we say goodbye to someone, we don't know if that is going to be the last time that we see that person in this life or not. In the morning when we wake up, we don't have a way to know that this is going to be our last day in this body or not. And I can assure you that most people who died on the day that they died had something planned for the following day. And I could give you a long list of examples, people that I know, that just died like that. When they least expected it, people in perfect health, people very young, sick people, old people, and then then there's people who they think it's like it seems that they're just about to die and they never die. Sooner or later they do, but when you're sure that they're not going to make it to the end of the month, but then years go by. It seems like they're eternal somehow. I'm kidding. There are impermanent phenomena, but there are a couple permanent phenomena too. Kidding. And then there are those who think I'm going to live forever, and then boom. There was once I watched one TV show that was like these strange deaths, and there was this man, very very strong man, who was very strong. He fell down, and he hit his head. He hit his head and lost consciousness, but he ended up with his face in the dog dish full of water, and he actually drowned. Well, a friend in the monastery once said, "I'm not going to the hospital. I don't go to hospitals anymore because my master died. He died going to the hospital." Well, at that point, I'd say, don't eat anymore. There are people who choke to death. Don't take the stairs. Some people, slip and they die, or don't stay at home. People die at home. Even Lama Tsongkhapa says, our life is as fragile as a water bubble in a river, and so the possibilities of dying are many, and we don't know. We have no certainty. I repeat that the problem is not dying. The problem is living badly. But when we have that awareness of the preciousness of this life, the joy of having this opportunity, and we are sure where we're sure that and we're sure that we don't know how long this is going to last, and at that point we live life to the fullest. We ask forgiveness where we need to ask forgiveness. We open our hearts when we feel like we open up our hearts, etc. And then we live our life in a coherent way. And I recognize that I am a fruit. I am a result of everything that I've done and thought and said in the past, and so it will be as tomorrow. This law of karma. So I need to live accordingly. And given that life is short and it's a precious opportunity, what do I want to do with this life, with this opportunity? Do I want to keep living as if I were immortal and try to spend the rest of my days surviving comfortably, trying to avoid problems and enjoy pleasures, trying to run away from myself? Like once there was this meditator, female meditator, who spent many, many years meditating, and one day someone said to her, "But you're really quite selfish going by yourself for 12 years by yourself in some mountain hut, mountain cave. You're running away from life's problems. It's a way to run away." And she said, actually, it's the opposite. Because when we're alone, there's a moment where we don't have anyone onto whom we can project our problems. And what we do often in life, we're in our life, we're busy with life to run away from ourselves. To not see, to not face our own traumas, our own inner conflicts, to not face ourselves, and to not take the reins in our own hands. We run away by distracting ourselves. So the question that we ask ourselves is, what do I want? How do I want to live this life? What do I want to reach? What do I want? What do I expect? And I know that we don't have an answer that comes right away, and of course it's even harder to put it all into practice. But Buddha guides us, and he says that what we should want is to have inner peace, to be at peace with ourselves and with others, because all the conflicts of the world, when we look at all the conflicts in the world, this all comes from the lack of inner peace. Tell me, name any kind of war that exists because of objective external conditions. Wars come from selfishness, from fear, from anger, from hate, from attachment. So the same things that create wars, we have them within as well. So just to clarify this, once we have this clarity, then we have this joy within, and we have a clear path. And it's important that in the conclusion of the preliminaries, I see the shadow, but I'm walking towards the light. I'm not walking against the darkness, the shadow, but I'm going towards the light. This process is not about eliminating the darkness, but to generate light instead, because we have this tendency of feeling guilty, and we see the darkness, and we think that the path is about eliminating our darkness, and we feel guilty. The point is about seeing the darkness so that we can bring the light to where there is darkness. But our path is about developing light and not going against the shadows, against the darkness. Okay? And these are the preliminaries. Now, without getting into other details, we can spend days and days talking about it, but I think in essence it's quite clear. Let's go to the second point. The second point is called the actual practice, training in the awakening mind. In just a few words, that second point is the most important of the 7, which is the actual training. First, we prepared ourselves for this training and clarity about what we want, and we've generated this strong desire to want to make our life meaningful. And without that determination, this would be very difficult. Imagine an athlete, for example, who needs to train for the Olympics, but doesn't want to actually participate in the Olympics. What would that athlete say to that level of training? Like, say, why am I doing all this? What allows these crazies, sorry if I call them like this, crazy, because I say crazy because I have a lot of esteem for such athletes. It's just I don't understand, and it's not something that's part of my life. But what actually motivates them to put in so much effort in such high level of training? There's the objective of the Olympics, of of there's that objective of winning a gold medal. Without that objective, would one put in such effort, make such effort? So the preliminaries is like winning medals, winning a medal at the Olympics. And once I have that determination, then I can go to my trainer and say, I'm ready to train. So that second point is the actual practice. What is it that we're training in? In the mind of Buddha. In being the best version of ourselves. And this is summarized in 2 trainings, where we train in love and compassion, and then we train also in wisdom. This is the essence. These are the 2 wings that are necessary to fly. Method and wisdom, they're called. Method makes reference to love, compassion, generosity, morality, our conduct in general. And the part of wisdom has to do with our correct view of reality. These are the 2 wings that allow us to fly towards Buddhahood. So if someone were to ask simply, what is mind training? It's training in method, love and compassion, and wisdom, simply put. So here we have 2 wings. The first one says how to train in the ultimate awakening mind, the mind of the ultimate awakening mind. So we have absolute or ultimate of and then also conventional. How to train the mind in wisdom and how to train the mind in method, compassion, and love. So we use the terms relative bodhicitta and absolute bodhicitta. So let's read the annotations of Paboka Rinpoche. According to most of the older records, the training in the ultimate awakening mind is dealt with first. However, according to our tradition, following the gentle protector Tsongkhapa, as contained in such works as Mind Training Like the Rays of the Sun, Ornament for Lobzang's Thoughts, Essential Nectar, and Kutzang's Root Words, the order is reversed for special reasons. What is this all about? Along the path of guiding someone towards enlightenment, there are 2 orders to follow. There are those who have a greater intellectual capacity or a lesser capacity. First, those who have greater intellect, they need to understand first. Instead, those who have a lesser intellect, they're of a lesser intellect, have more faith. So they practice and then they set the understanding for after. So those who have a greater intellect, the teachings, it said that first one needs to understand and realize wisdom, the interdependence of things, how phenomena exist, and then go on to develop love and compassion. So, but even at the time of Lama Tsongkhapa, he said that most of us are of a lesser intellect. That first we need to develop compassion to then in parallel or after enter into the teachings and understanding of wisdom. So first there's the part of love and then wisdom. And at the end of the day, what I see for most of us, that we mix both of them. We do both compassion and love, but also training in wisdom. But our priority should be to first train in love and compassion. But but we need to see what works best for ourselves, and it's not a question of ego, of thinking, well, I'm of a greater intellect, I should be doing it like this. But we can say that since the 14th century is practiced mostly first love and compassion and then wisdom. And so let's follow this order. So even in the title is written how to train in the ultimate awakening mind, so ultimate bodhichitta, and B, how to train in conventional awakening mind method, love and wisdom. So even in this following page, it starts with 2B and then 2A. So we maintain the original, but we also here we invert it. So these verses are the most important parts of this training, and it's marvelous because in just a few words, an enormous amount of information is given and these texts are not to give us information, but they serve to show us, remind us of what we should be doing. So, training in the conventional awakening mind, me, banish the one to blame for everyone. Banish the one to blame for everything. Meditate or familiarize yourself on the great kindness of all beings. Practice a combination of giving and taking. Giving and taking should be practiced alternately. And you should begin by taking from yourself. These two should be made to ride on the breath. Concerning the three objects, the three poisons and the three virtues, the instructions to be followed, in short, is to be mindful of the practice in general by taking these words to heart in all activities. Let's start with the first. Repeat after me. Lelen tamche chiglada kunla katrin chewargom. Who is the one? Who's the one to blame for everything when there's a suffering, a problem, something? When there's something's wrong, who is the one to blame other than someone else? Actually, really. For example, think about environmental problems that we have, the problems of war, conflicts, armed wars, violence in general, economic problems, problems in society, in political problems, social problems. If we were to really look for a cause, someone to blame for all of this, on a global level, on a social level, or an individual level, what is it what's behind all of this? What generates all of this? This obsession with self-gratification. Tell me, name a war that without this obsession with self-gratification, a war that would be able to maintain itself. I mean, has there ever been a war based on compassion, political, economic, social problems? If there wasn't on the part of each one of us this obsession with the self-gratification, there wouldn't be these problems. But let's start with something closer to home. Have you ever had a conflict at home? Let me rephrase the question. Has anyone never had a problem, a conflict at home? I don't think so. So how do these conflicts arise? There's my point of view, my needs, and then there's your point of view, your needs, your desires, your version, my desires, my version. And as long as they go together, everything's fine. When what I want doesn't correspond with what you want, what I don't want doesn't correspond with what you don't want, then we already start having problems. Because my interaction with you and my attractions and my aversions don't go together with yours. In other words, it's through selfishness, self-centeredness. We live every relationship, every situation in function of that I and the my. This is what we mean by obsession with self-gratification. So, and then what happens? One, we don't see the other. We see only something that exists in function of ourselves. We can't see the other beyond the I and the my. We see the other in function of my needs, this I and the my. And this blocks us. It blocks the most beautiful part of ourselves, this sincere feeling of love towards others. So selfishness blocks that. We love as if we were doing business. I love you as long as you correspond to my needs, and that you're there to help me reach and my own desires, as long as your needs are similar to mine. Once you become an obstruction to my well-being, or something that increases my suffering, you're not my friend anymore. I don't love you as much as before, or like before. It's true, isn't it? So selfishness or self-centeredness makes it so that we divide reality in 9 categories. They're called the 9 objects. And when we relate with any situation, object, person of any kind, when at the basis there is this obsession with self-gratification, as we said, then we inevitably we put these people, places, and things in these 9 categories, which are the following: that which does good for me. Let's use the example of a person, but it can be a situation, a place, or an object. So what's good for me is my friend. Something, someone that I have attraction for. My friend. I love you. Because you are good to me. You do good for me. What is bad to me is my enemy. I have aversion to you, towards you. And if we don't want to say friend and foe, we can say we can use attraction and aversion. Friend and foe. Then there's also maybe someone who is not good, good or bad to me, and so I generate neutrality, indifference, neither attraction nor aversion. Then we have a friend of our friend, who becomes our friend. The enemy of our enemy is also who is bad to my enemy is my friend. And here we see a terrible dynamic, but that is actual, that it's easier to create friendship, attraction, having a common enemy than having a common friend. Because when we have an enemy in common, because if I'm friendly with you because you're a friend of my friend, but I'm also in competition with you because I want you to be friends with my friends, but not too close of a friend with my friend because I want to receive from my friend. And instead, if it's an enemy of an enemy, we're not in competition. We want him to destroy our enemy the way we want to destroy our enemy. So we have 3 types of friends. The one who's good to me, is the one who's good to my friend, and who is bad, who does wrong to my enemy. The one who, then we have the next 3, which is who is good, who's bad to me is my enemy. The one who is good to my enemy is my enemy. Now just think about having a strong aversion. Maybe someone we know shows kindness to someone we're in conflict with. Then that person, that generates malaise and aversion on our side. So we have aversion. So we have aversion also for these 3 types of categories. And then also the indifference. The category of indifference are also 3. I mean, just imagine I'm walking down the road and we see 3 people that come towards us. One has a characteristic that we would call beautiful, has a certain traits that we would call beautiful. The other would be stereotypically ugly for us. And then there's a person that is neither beautiful nor ugly, neutral. When we walk by these three people, what feeling do we have? All the same feeling towards everyone? No, towards the one we think is beautiful. We have attraction. We feel friendly. The one that we see ugly or some kind of negative stereotype, we generate aversion. And towards the one who is neither beautiful or ugly, we feel indifference. And even from this, we can see, I mean, we're three strangers. We don't know them. We have no idea who they are. But what happens within? We are unable to see others without putting that filter of selfishness, self-centeredness, and that filter divides up the world in these 9 categories. So what happens towards our friends? We have attraction. This attraction generates attachment, which then, as a consequence, the fear of not having, or jealousy and envy. And these are not just people. It can be situations or things, objects, people, just beings in general. When we say friend, it's something on which we project our attraction. So what's good to me and what is bad to me. And so we're constantly in this game between attraction and aversion. And then from aversion, what arises? How does aversion arise? It comes out in violence, aggression, anger, hate, resentment. And then there's indifference, which is actually a form of violence. You know, being indifferent to the suffering of others is a form of violence. As if it weren't enough, we have also the 3 ways that selfishness relates to these 9 objects. So beyond, now we're talking more about a person instead of a situation. So regardless of whether the person in front of me is a friend, an enemy, or an indifferent, when we're in front of this person, through this selfishness, we can relate in 3 different ways. Towards those who are towards he who has more than me, is more beautiful, is richer, is more intelligent than me, who receives more intelligence and receives more attention than me, who has more than me, regardless of whether he is a friend, an enemy, or just someone to whom I'm indifferent. We feel envy towards this person. Towards he who is the same, who's rich as me, is the same as me, is as intelligent, as handsome or beautiful as me, we feel competition. And he who has or is less than me, receives less attention, is less attractive, is less wealthy. How do we act towards he who we consider as being lesser? We feel arrogant. We feel superior. And at the end of the day, we never relax. And this is how self-centeredness works. We divide things into categories of attraction, aversion, and indifference, because through self-centeredness, we're constantly comparing ourselves to others, and together with this idea of comparing ourselves, we have this idea of how we should be. So if you have more than me, and I think that I should be like that, then I have aversion, because you are what I want to be, but I'm not. I have aversion towards you because you have what I don't have and I want. Often it's not even things that we want. But since you have it, I want it too. I mean, this is envy. And then there's this force of this of competition, of this, how we see how difficult it is to rejoice for others. We feel competition towards others. We feel arrogant towards others. So this need to compare ourselves to others, to see ourselves, because we're not obsessed only with the I and the my, but we see ourselves through this comparison with others. This is another characteristic of selfishness. So what happens is one never relaxes. That we're always in this game of attraction and aversion. And what happens when there's an object of attraction at a certain point harms me? I feel like I have been cheated. I develop aversion. But we're the ones who suffer. So, lelintamche chiglada, banish the one to blame for everyone. Banish the one to blame for everything. That first step, is recognizing that recognize that the primary cause for all of our suffering is this grasping at self. And then there's, as I've said many times, egotistically speaking, it's better to be altruistic. I mean, because we are selfish, aren't we? So how can I become altruistic if I'm selfish and self-centered? The only real way to be able to do it is egotistically understanding that it's better to be altruistic. I have to use selfishness to convince myself that it's better to be altruistic. So let's give a definition to both. And I'd like to add also, how can I say, something that I've never read in these words. It was never explained to me in this way, but it's really the way I see it. So I say it. I mean, but it can be right or it can be wrong. But according to me, altruism doesn't exist in opposition to selfishness, but altruism is the development of selfishness. Selfishness is the same attitude, is immature attitude, and altruism is the mature attitude. Let me explain myself better. Let's try to do it as an exercise. Let's observe within. Let's try for a moment to see behind every action, behind every choice, every word that we say, every action that we do. So behind all of this, there's a kind of force. This force of attraction to happiness and aversion to suffering. So the first thing is allowing ourselves to see this within our own selves. To see how we have a strong attraction to happiness and well-being, and we see a strong aversion to suffering. And let's recognize that within ourselves is enormous. When we're able to see this force, when it's closed up and directed exclusively towards the I and my, is called selfishness, self-centeredness. Now let's try for a moment to imagine, a little bit like this singing bowl when played. What happens? There's a vibration that starts from the singing bowl and expands. Let's imagine within this strong feeling of attraction for happiness and aversion to suffering. Let's imagine them like waves that go out. And we take that same strength, that same desire to attraction to happiness and aversion to suffering that we have within, and we allow these waves to include others without excluding ourselves. We expand that feeling. Yes, I want to be happy, but your happiness is important to me as my own. Your suffering is as important to me as my own. So I don't want to suffer, but I don't want you to suffer either. I want to be happy, but I want you to be happy too. I want you to be as happy as I want your happiness as much as I want my mind. So I take this craving, this strong attachment to happiness, and I allow it to expand and include others. When I'm able to do this freely, spontaneously, this is altruism. So altruism includes the I and the my. It doesn't exclude it. As long as we see altruism in opposition to selfishness, we'll never be able to develop it. Otherwise, we get into that dynamic of when I do something for others, it's a sacrifice, and when I do something for myself, I feel guilty. And that's just totally wrong. We should get to the point that when I do something for others, it's something also for me, because your happiness is as important to me as my own. Let's give an example. Think of a mother, a father. Or we can imagine someone for whom we have strong love and attachment. The original example would be the mother, the feeling a mother has towards her only child. And let's imagine that we're in a nice, comfortable place. Maybe someone's giving us nice massage. Just think about something that you like. Maybe the sun shining on your back, but in front of us, there's the person that we love so much that is drowning. What is more difficult? Jumping into the water, maybe we're even afraid of water, but trying to save the person who's drowning, or staying where we are, being massaged. For me, it'd be more difficult to stay where we are. The example given is that you're there relaxed, and then in front of you is a house that is burning, and inside the house there's the person that you love. What's more difficult, doing nothing or running into the house to save the person? It's more difficult to stay where we are, because the suffering of that person is important to me. The happiness of that person is important to me. So when I go into the burning house and I burn myself, it's not a sacrifice. It's something that is good for me too, because their happiness and their suffering is important to me too. This is the feeling of sincere love and compassion. And when there is someone who is in difficulty, and I go and to help them, I help them with sincerity. It's I'm doing something for myself as well. When I do something to help someone feel joy or to be well, because that well-being of that person is important to me, just as important as my own happiness. This is the feeling of altruism. At the same time, when I do something for myself, I mean, if I'm not well, how can I help others? So when I'm taking care of myself, I'm helping others as well. But it doesn't. We don't have a division. We don't have this division between 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 us and others, where we equalize and exchange ourselves with others, is said, is expression in Tibetan. So first we need to equalize. Your suffering is as important to me as my own. Your happiness is important to me as my own. We're in the same boat. You don't want to be unhappy. I don't want to be unhappy. You want to be happy. I want to be happy. You're guided by your ignorance the way I'm guided by my own ignorance. There's no difference between us in those aspects, in those fundamental aspects. Of course, we have many other differences, but in the fundamental aspects, there's no difference. That's the part of equalizing ourselves with others. And what I do, I take and exchanging ourselves with others, I'm able to take that feeling I have towards the I and the my, and I include others. So exchanging self with others is not about putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. No, here I'd start from a selfish attitude of I and my, and I direct it towards others. The same feeling that I have for myself, I open it up so it includes others. And to do this, the first thing we need to do is Lelentamte Chiglada. We recognize clearly how selfishness, this obsession with self-gratification, this fixation of the I and the my, that I am the most important that has ever existed in the universe and will ever exist in the universe. This inability to relate to others beyond our own desires and needs and aversions and attractions. We see how this generates suffering. One more example. Try to see, go back and think about a time when you felt sadness or resentment or jealousy, envy, fear, or any other feeling of that kind, where the I and the my had no part. You can't find it. You can't find one. And in the dynamics of the arisal of suffering, jealousy, envy, anger are negative actions. They're based on this relationship with attraction and aversion that come from selfishness, division between friend and foe, competition, envy, arrogance. This all comes from this game. So it's important for us to see what's at the basis, what's at the root of these negative emotions. Here there's a verse, Geshe Rinpoche says, it says, all sufferings, this is a verse of Shantideva, all the sufferings in this world, all of them come from one's own obsession, come from the obsession with one's own happiness. He's citing Geshe Rinpoche is citing different verses.
Mangtu sheta chigotes chiba rangi tunche dans tuba shenge tunze pa teni gini kebertös. Verso del sempre del Bodhisattva.
From the Bodhisattva Charvatara, the Shantideva, there's not much else to say. Just see how childish beings act for their own. They act for their own. They act for their own well-being, and the Buddhas. You see how they act. See the difference between the two. And what I've been able to see, that the more stable and joyous people are the people who have this ability to love more. The more, from what I've seen, those who are most obsessed with the I and the my and their own well-being, the worse off they are, independently of being rich or healthy or young, whatever. Another example is when I went to see this person. I didn't have great expectations in the sense I didn't expect much, but not in the sense that just for my own, I didn't think much about it. But when I went to see Madre Teresa, I saw so much joy in Calcutta, and we went to see her at her house in Calcutta. And I remember, I was 14 years old, and being in front of this woman who physically you could see that she wasn't well. I remember her feet, they were very strange, they were quite deformed. Her body, she was hunched over. You could see that physically she wasn't well, that her body had suffered a lot. It was soon before she died, maybe a year before she died. And at the same time, so this person's so full of joy, this strength. And where did that come from? In my opinion, that came from the love for others that she felt. And when we're able to feel a sincere love towards others, when we allow those rare moments to go beyond our own selfishness, that inner feeling is such a great state of joy that can't be compared to anything else. A little bit like, we all want to be loved. When we feel loved, somehow we come into contact with that feeling of love that is so beautiful. But being loved is beautiful, but loving is even more beautiful. And when we're able to come into contact with that part of ourselves and allow ourselves to desire the happiness of others, where we see others as ourselves, that generates a state of well-being and happiness that is incomparable. And when we, following a certain logic, I'm convinced that what generates inner suffering is that which is inconsistent, unbalanced, incoherent, and what takes us towards harmony is what is coherent. It's almost as if our own being with our body and mind had a kind of system. How can I say, a way to show us if we're doing the right thing or the wrong thing for our own well-being. And when we do something that generates suffering, it's like a kind of alarm that goes off. And instead, when we feel something that is generating sincere joy and happiness, it's taking us towards balance. And when we feel sincere love, it generates enormous well-being. So Lelen Tamche Chiglada, so banish really the one to blame for everything. Recognize deeply that the cause of every suffering is found in one's own obsession for self-gratification. But this should be done with a specific attitude, because remember that these teachings were given in a different context. This text was written at the beginning of the 12th century in Tibet, where there wasn't even it was far, far from the mentality, far from the mentality of the time. What is far from the idea was this was the monotheistic context of that we grew up in. I think, and I could be wrong, those of us who grew up in this monotheistic culture, that we have this idea deep within that we should be pure somehow. And so when we read, banish the one to blame for everyone, and that our suffering comes from within, we have this sense of guilt that I shouldn't be like this. But I ask myself, when did my selfishness start? How long have I been selfish? In Buddhism, we talk about beginningless time. In other words, I'm not able to highlight, to identify a day when I wasn't selfish. So let's start from this assumption that we should not be, we don't have an idealized image of how we are supposed to be but am not. And I don't know where it comes from, but I see that in our culture, different from other cultures, there is this idea that we should be pure, but we're not. We should have been, but we're not. There's an idealized idea of ourselves. I don't know if you recognize this in yourselves. So this idealized image makes us feel guilty. Oh, look how selfish I am. I'm so bad. I shouldn't be like this. Why should I not be like this if I've always been like this? The point isn't about if I should be or I shouldn't be. The point is that I would be better if I wasn't. So I am what I am, the result of everything that has come up today, and I treat myself with kindness and affection. I don't put myself in opposition to what I am, but I direct myself to what I want to become. Recognizing selfishness as a cause of our suffering is not an opportunity to point the finger at ourselves and say, "Oh, how bad I am," and feel guilty. But it's an opportunity to say, "Okay, it would be better if I were different. How wonderful to see what is not right so that I can make the right changes." So let's start with this. Lelen Tamche Chiglada, banish the one to blame for everything. Kun la Katrin Che Orgom. Kun means everyone. Katrin means gratitude. Chewar is great, and here is all beings. So meditate on the great kindness, familiarize yourself with the great kindness of all beings. to be able to open my heart towards someone of these 9 categories that we summarized in 3. So in what category does this person need to be in so that I can open up my heart? Friend, foe, or indifferent? Friend, right? Because let's remember, even if we recognize that selfishness is the cause of all my suffering, we're still selfish, right? Even if we recognize that, selfishly speaking, it's better to be altruistic, we start from the recognizing that we are selfish. So how can I open up my heart to everyone when actually I naturally divide everyone up in 3 categories? We need to put everyone in the first. There's no alternative. I shouldn't try to not to eliminate the only way is to little by little move everyone into that first category of friends. And how can I do that? So either that being needs to also do good by me, or we need to have an enemy in common, a common enemy. For example, if I go to the hospital, I have a sickness, or I'm bringing someone I love to the hospital who has a sickness. Let's think that we have maybe even we just have a toothache. At a certain point, I see someone who also has a toothache. What feeling do we have towards that person? Attraction, aversion, or indifference? Why attraction? Because he's enemy of our enemy, the toothache. We're trying to face a common suffering, and that brings us together. So to be able to put everyone in that first category, 1, we need to recognize the good that they do to us, and number 2, recognize that we have the same enemies. So kun la katrin che wargom. Let's try to see that. Meditate on the great kindness, the gratitude of all beings. When someone does something good for us, how long does that last? Is there an expiration date? You do something good to me, what feeling do I have towards you? I have attraction, right? Gratitude, right? But once you stop being kind to me or doing good for me, does that gratitude that I had developed, does that end? Theoretically, no, but maybe actually in practice it does. But theoretically, when someone does something good for me, there's no expiration date for that gratitude. It's not like after 6 months, I don't feel that gratitude towards that person anymore, right? One important key in this process is being able to feel gratitude, is being able to see what we receive from others and to feel gratitude. Let's imagine that we find ourselves in a state of total fragility, a moment where to survive we depend on someone else, to eat, to protect ourselves from the heat and cold. We're in total dependency on total dependence on someone else for our survival. Is there someone who comes, who protects us, who feeds us, takes care of us when we're sick, takes care of us with affection? what kind of feeling would we have towards someone who treated us like that? Gratitude, right? Has someone ever done this for us? Have we ever found ourselves in a situation where we were totally defenseless, or we couldn't eat by ourselves, we couldn't survive by ourselves, we weren't able to protect ourselves from sicknesses, heat and cold? When we were born, right? And is there someone who took care of us? Towards that person or those person who took care of us, beyond, regardless of what happened after, it would be right. It would be coherent, let's say, to feel gratitude. And there are many other reasons we should have gratitude towards our own parents. But if for no other reason, they saved our lives more than, even more than just giving life to us. But this body comes from our parents, that we're just borrowing it. And this is another subject that Shantideva also elaborates. But at a certain point, when I was in a moment, the most fragile point of my life, there was someone who took care of me. Regardless of whether it was a biological mother or father, there was someone who took care of me. And I have gratitude towards this person. It's interesting because one thing that doesn't allow us to feel gratitude is because in our ignorance, in our selfish way of loving, we have this dynamic where if I love you, if I have gratitude towards you, it's as if I've generalized that everything that we've lived together, everything you've done is fine, which is not true. One thing is one thing, another thing is another thing. The fact that I have deep gratitude for the good things you did doesn't take away the other things that were hurtful or harmful. One thing doesn't take away the other. We have this tendency, it's hard to love someone for whom we have aversion, someone who's harmed us in the enemy category. How can I have gratitude towards someone who's in that enemy category? First of all, by putting effort into judging actions and not the person. Because name anyone who's done only positive things or only negative things, or an interaction that you have with someone that is exclusively good or exclusively bad. I've never seen that. So I can have gratitude for the things that I've received, and I can keep some distance, maybe even have some aversion for the things I did not live well. But the fact that there were interactions that I didn't live well, or I don't want them to repeat, it doesn't mean that I can't have gratitude for the positive things that happened, that I received. Okay? And here, it's a delicate and interesting how culturally, historically, things change in this 12th century, 11th century in Tibet, and even after, it was taken for granted that one had a good relationship with one's own mother. In the Tibetan culture, the gratitude towards one's own parents is very strong, regardless of what they do. That gratitude towards the parents comes before everything else, and instead culturally speaking, today, it's not like that. Am I right? Everything, in the extreme is not very helpful, but in the context in which we find ourselves, it becomes important for us to look in our hearts, look towards our parents, and feel gratitude by starting from the fact that they saved our lives when we were born. And someone might say, but they wanted me. Well, what does that have to do with anything? The fact that they wanted me, does that take away the fact that they helped me when I was defenseless? So if we're able, starting from this, this is fundamental, basic. We feel gratitude, and from this gratitude, we can start to expand it and see all the other things that we have received and we constantly receive. I mean, just being here, how many beings, how many people were involved for us to be here, or how many people are behind a plate of food, regardless of whether we pay for it or not. If I go to a restaurant and I pay for something, there's someone who cultivated that food, who bought that food, who cooked that food. It's a terrible illusion that this idea that once I pay for something, I've paid and I shouldn't have gratitude. There's no more debt, let's say. Of course there's a material exchange, but that doesn't take away the fact that there was a lot of work involved from many people for me to receive what I received. So this feeling of gratitude is a feeling of fullness and joy, where we see how beautiful it is, everything we've received. And if we look around, we receive so much. So when we're able to look around and we familiarize ourselves with gratitude by thanking and rejoicing, sincerely thanking for what we receive, realizing also that we depend on so many beings, this is fundamental. For example, an example that I heard once and it really touched me. When we breathe in, we inhale. It's wonderful to be able to breathe, isn't it? To have oxygen. What does our breathing have to do with a whale? So much. A good part of the oxygen that we breathe, I can't remember what percentage it was, what fraction it was, maybe a third, something like this. It's generated by photosynthesis from the plants in the ocean. So these plants in the ocean, they wouldn't be able to survive if they weren't fertilized. The greatest fertilizer of the ocean is a whale. It's very big and it poops a lot. The whale's poop nourishes the plankton, these plants in the ocean that these plankton then generate the oxygen that we breathe. So we can, looking at the fraction, maybe every third or every fourth breath comes from the interaction between the plankton and the whales. So we really see how everything is connected, how there's nothing that we can do that doesn't depend on everyone. Even when we talk about biodiversity, it's not because, I mean, it's nice to see different species with different colors and forms. No, it's because we live in such a complex network where every small part has enormous, that plays an enormous part in the whole, and our survival really depends on a very complex balance. And so we depend on others, even where we can't imagine. So when we reflect on all this, and we see this level of interdependence, and we see how much we receive from every being, sometimes at the beginning of winter, the Albagnano is filled with stink bugs, and I've and then and it's happened that I've looked at these stink bugs and I've asked them, what part do you play? What part do you play in this great network? In my ignorance, I haven't been able to find, what function, but I'm sure that it plays an important function, and every being does, every person does. I remember once I was here in Albagnano, and the oracle came, the one who incorporates this entity. It's special. It was an important moment, and I brought our friend from the center. Her name was Teresa Tornicchia. Who knew Teresa? Just a few people, actually. Teresa. I brought Teresa. She was particular. And I asked the oracle to give her a special blessing. She was a kleptomaniac. She was obsessive in her way of speaking. First I saw Duccio. I think he just left. Duccio once, he was in Milan, and he was painting. Actually, the one that you see at the entrance with Buddha with the tree, and he was painting that at the Kumpen in Milan. And as he was painting, Teresa, she had her apartment in Milan, but she would spend 24 hours a day in the Kumpen, literally 24 hours, and she was there just going around, hanging around, and at a certain point, and she was talking, and Duccio thought, well, how can I explain to her? How can I show her that it's not the right time to talk to me? So he decided to ignore her, and then she was saying, did you know this? Do you know that? And then after 2 days like this, she stopped talking, and then at a certain point, she said, Duccio, I'm sorry. I want to say that you're not ignoring me because you're not because you're rude, but surely you need to concentrate on the work that you're doing, and I shouldn't be here to disturb you. I understand why you're staying in silence. And then he said, thank you, Teresa, you're right. And then she started, and she never stopped talking. She was very beautiful in many aspects. Any of you who were at the beginning of the TV in Italy, there was a kind of in between programs, there was an interval with all the photos of cities of Italy, and that was playing with the harp. That was Teresa playing the harp, and she's also the one who gave the melody of the mantra of the Guru that we do during self-healing. Oma Guru Vajradhara. Anyway, so we asked for a special blessing from the oracle, and the oracle looked at her in the eyes, and then looked at me, and he said, take very good care of her because she takes away interferences. And it's a little bit mystical, but the day that Teresa left her body, not even just after a couple hours, the whole ceiling of the Gompa came down. Okay, that's a little mystical, but aside from that, what would happen is that, I mean, she had a very important role in our community. She absorbed tensions because you know, if something's missing, we could say, oh, Teresa took it. There was a problem, we could say, oh, Teresa. So everyone projected their own dissatisfactions, their problems onto her. She was absorbing negativities. Because what are interferences? They're tensions of everyone that somehow interact and create conflict. So she had a very important role. Like traditionally, the crazy one of the village was always treated with respect. So even that person who apparently was difficult and created problems, even that person has a role, and it plays a role in the very complex interdependence and in our own happiness. And it's difficult to interact, to create an interdependence that's more and more positive. But going back to the point, our happiness, our well-being, our survival, and first and foremost, our spiritual growth cannot exist without others. For example, along our path, method and wisdom, the half of our path depends on the development of love and compassion, patience, generosity, awareness. How can I develop all this if I can't, if I don't have someone to share this with? If I'm in front of someone, if I have someone that I'm in conflict with, that person is actually a mirror showing me where the imbalances are within. So thank you. You are helping me. Even if I don't want to see you, you are helping me. If I see someone who is in trouble and I'm able to help and feel compassion, and that person is helping me come in contact with the most beautiful part of myself. Thank you. Because without you, I wouldn't be able to come into contact with the most beautiful part of myself and develop it even more. So our spiritual growth depends on sentient beings, as much on sentient beings as on the holy beings. It's said, if we were to look at the amount of gratitude we should have towards the sentient beings compared to all the holy beings, it's the same. Because we could never, ever develop love, compassion, patience, generosity, to not say others, without other people, without other beings. And then we add to this, I mean, we see that other beings are afflicted by the same sicknesses that we are. I mean, think of anyone, a stereotype of someone, a public person, a public person, or someone you know. And ask yourself, does this person do what he does, guided by his own ignorance, the way I do? Yes. It's like, it's similar to going to the hospital and meeting someone with the same sickness we have. We all have the same illness. And when we're able to unite these two aspects, gradually, it's very gradually, starting with those closest to us, to go from this attitude of friend, enemy, indifferent, and we little by little we add everyone into the category of friend. So regardless of whether I agree with your behavior or not, I depend on you. My compassion depends on you. My love depends on you. My patience depends on you. My generosity depends on you. My survival depends on you. We are afflicted by the same sicknesses. We're in the same boat. We're much closer than we can imagine. And this adds up with the fact that it's not because I forgot that you helped me that I shouldn't have gratitude towards you. In all the years that we've lived in this life, we add up also our previous lives, all our previous lives. Even if we think just of this life, in all these years, we've received so much from so many beings, and we depend on each one. So thank you. Thank you, not in the sense of being indebted, but in thank you. So we generate this profound feeling of gratitude. And this second verse here, when it says, Lulen tamche chiglada kun la katrin chewar gom, banish the one to blame for everything, meditate on the great kindness of all beings. This is the foundation. And then in the following lines are the tools to reach that goal. So here, this training in conventional bodhichitta of love and compassion is about realizing that, selfishly speaking, it's wiser to be altruistic. The more beneficial to be altruistic, and that we depend on everyone. We are all in the same boat. We have the same sickness. And this second part is very, very strong, because when there's conflict and we're in this, and we're both in the same, let's say we're victim of the same ill. That makes us closer, doesn't it? And when we're able to see, let's see, like a stereotype of the worst, who would be in our enemy category, and we see even that person in our enemy category, actually, we're both victim of a greater ill. And that unites us. Who's that greater ill? Is selfishness, ignorance itself, with all of its manifestations. Being able, allowing ourselves to see this has an enormous, enormous power. These two lines, this lelentam che chiglada and kun la kadren che waragom, just banish the one to blame for everything, and familiarize yourself with the gratitude that we have for all beings. And this is the essence of, and then is the part of the practice that we'll see tomorrow. It's the practice of Tonglen, which is a meditation, a practical tool to make these changes from a selfish attitude to an altruistic practice. So there's a technique of meditation that is taught, this practice of giving and taking, which is described in the next lines. Just it's marvelous in such a few lines. It says, practice a combination of giving and taking. Giving and taking should be practiced alternately, and you should begin by taking from yourself. And we will see this tomorrow. It's, the practice of Tonglen is not only to generate love and compassion towards others, but at the beginning to generate love and compassion towards ourselves as well, and where we cure, we heal our own past, and we know that we cannot love others if we don't love ourselves first.
Drove munsel taktu ne gyur chi kewa kuntu yanda lama dang dralme cheki pela longche sada lamge yönde rabzo ne dorje change kopa nyurto sho nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan dele kshin Ninsen takto delek pe koncho sumki chingi lok koncho sumki ngodrugot sol koncho sumki tashi
At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Have a good lunch. Thank you, everyone.